I watched in horror as HOA President Karen Mitchell grabbed my 72-year-old mother, pushed her onto the concrete, and kicked her in the ribs for planting memorial roses. Karen thought her HOA position protected her from consequences. She was wrong. 3 minutes later, police arrested her in front of everyone. Before watching full story, comment below from where you're watching, also like and subscribe for more stories. It was a beautiful Saturday morning when my 72-year-old mother decided to tend to her small flower garden in front of our house. Mom had been living with me for 2 years since Dad passed away. Taking care of her roses was one of the few things that still brought her joy. I was inside making breakfast when I heard shouting outside. Through the kitchen window, I saw a tall blonde woman in expensive clothes marching toward my mother's garden. It was Karen Mitchell, the HOA president who had been making everyone's life miserable for the past year. "Get away from those flowers right now," Karen screamed at my mother. Mom looked up, confused. She was kneeling beside her rose bush, wearing her old gardening gloves and holding small pruning shears. "Excuse me, these are my flowers." "Those flowers violate HOA regulations," Karen shouted. "They're not approved colors and they're planted too close to the sidewalk." I quickly walked outside to see what was happening. My mother's roses were beautiful, pink, white, and red blooms that she had carefully grown for months. There was nothing wrong with them. "Karen, what's the problem here?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "The problem is your mother thinks she can ignore HOA rules just because she's old," Karen snapped. "These flowers need to be removed immediately." My mother slowly stood up, using her walking cane for support. At 72, she had arthritis and moved carefully. "Young lady, I've been gardening for 50 years. These roses aren't hurting anyone." "I don't care how old you are," Karen said coldly. "Rules are rules. Remove them now or I'll have them removed for you." That's when everything went wrong. Karen stepped closer to my mother and pointed her finger inches from Mom's face. "I'm tired of old people thinking they can do whatever they want in my neighborhood." "Ma'am, please step back," I said firmly. "You're being aggressive toward an elderly woman." "I'll be as aggressive as I need to be," Karen yelled. "Your mother is destroying property values with her ugly flowers." My mother, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. "These roses belong to my late husband. I planted them in his memory. I'm not removing them." Karen's face turned red with rage. "You will remove them, or I'll call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." "She lives here," I pointed out. "How can she be trespassing on her own property?" "The front yard belongs to the HOA," Karen screamed. This was completely untrue, but Karen often made up rules when she was angry. My mother shook her head. "I'm not removing my husband's memorial flowers." That's when Karen lost complete control. She grabbed my mother's arm and tried to pull her away from the garden. My 72-year-old mother stumbled, nearly falling. "Let go of her," I shouted, moving toward them, but Karen was in a rage. She pushed my mother hard in the chest, causing Mom to fall backward onto the concrete sidewalk. The sound of my mother hitting the pavement was horrible. She cried out in pain as her walking cane clattered away from her. "Mom!" I rushed to help her up. Karen stood over my fallen mother and screamed, "Maybe now you'll learn to follow the rules." That's when she made her biggest mistake. With my mother lying hurt on the ground, Karen raised her foot and kicked my mother in the ribs. "This is what happens when you disobey the HOA," Karen shouted. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. A grown woman had just physically attacked my elderly mother in broad daylight, in front of multiple witnesses. But Karen wasn't done. She leaned down and started pulling up my mother's roses, throwing them at her. "There, problem solved," Karen yelled as she destroyed months of my mother's careful work. What Karen didn't realize was that her attack happened right in front of the neighborhood playground. It was Saturday morning, and several families were out with their children. Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived across the street, came running over. "Oh my God, are you okay?" she asked my mother. "I think so," Mom whispered, holding her side where Karen had kicked her. "It hurts to breathe." Mr. Johnson, who had been walking his dog, pulled out his phone. "I got the whole thing on video," he told me. "That woman is completely insane." The Chen family, who had been at the playground with their kids, also witnessed everything. Mrs. Chen was already calling 911. We saw her push the elderly lady down and kick her. Mrs. Chen told the 911 operator, "The woman is still here destroying the garden." Karen seemed to realize that people were watching and recording her, but instead of stopping, she became more aggressive. "Mind your own business," she yelled at the neighbors. This woman was violating HOA regulations. You just attacked a 72-year-old woman, Mrs. Rodriguez shouted back. That's assault, Karen laughed coldly. Good luck proving that. I'm the HOA president. I have authority to enforce community standards. She had no idea that her authority was about to disappear forever. Mrs. Chen's 911 call brought immediate results. Within 3 minutes of Karen's attack, 2 police cars pulled up to our house with sirens blaring. Officer Mike Torres was the first to get out. He took one look at the scene. My elderly mother sitting on the ground holding her ribs, scattered rose petals everywhere, and Karen standing over the destruction, and immediately understood what had happened. Ma'am, are you injured? Officer Torres asked my mother gently. She pushed me down and kicked me, Mom said weakly. Then she destroyed my husband's memorial garden. Officer Torres looked at Karen with disgust. Did you assault this elderly woman? I was enforcing HOA regulations, Karen replied arrogantly. She was violating community standards. By pushing down a 72-year-old woman and kicking her? She was being defiant and disrespectful, Karen said, as if that justified her actions. Officer Sarah Martinez, the second officer, was already talking to the witnesses. Mr. Johnson showed her his video of the attack. This is clear assault and battery, Officer Martinez told her partner. Multiple witnesses, video evidence, and an injured victim. Karen overheard and became defensive. You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president. I have immunity for enforcing community rules. Officer Torres stared at her in disbelief. Ma'am, there is no immunity for assaulting elderly people. You're under arrest. What happened next was the fastest arrest I've ever seen. Karen went from attacking my mother to being in handcuffs in exactly 3 minutes. You're under arrest for assault and battery on an elderly person. Officer Torres announced as he cuffed Karen. This is ridiculous, Karen screamed. She was violating HOA rules. I have the right to enforce them. You have the right to remain silent. Officer Martinez began reading her rights. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. But Karen couldn't stay quiet. Do you know who I am? I'm the president of this HOA. I have connections in this city. You can't arrest me for doing my job. Your job doesn't include assaulting senior citizens, Officer Torres replied firmly. The neighbors who had witnessed the attack were cheering as Karen was led to the police car. Word had spread quickly and more residents came out to see what was happening. About time someone stopped her, called out Mr. Peterson from down the street. She's been bullying people for months, added Mrs. Kim. Karen heard the comments and became even more agitated. You're all going to regret this. I'll make sure you all get evicted. Even while being arrested, she was still trying to threaten and intimidate people. As the police car drove away with Karen in the back seat, the neighborhood erupted in applause. Finally, their tormentor was facing consequences for her actions. The paramedics arrived shortly after Karen's arrest to check on my mother. She had bruises on her arm where Karen grabbed her, a scraped elbow from falling and possible bruised ribs from the kick. We should take her to the hospital for x-rays, the paramedic recommended. That kick to the ribs could have caused internal injuries. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed that Mom had bruised ribs but no broken bones. However, they were concerned about the emotional trauma. Attacking elderly people can cause lasting psychological effects, Dr. Williams explained. Your mother may develop anxiety or fear about being in public. Mom was quiet during the examination. She kept asking about her roses. 50 years I've been gardening, she whispered to me. Why would someone destroy flowers that weren't hurting anyone? Because she's a bully who finally picked on the wrong family, I replied. The hospital gave us documentation of Mom's injuries for the police report. The evidence against Karen was overwhelming. Detective Lisa Chang was assigned to Mom's case. She came to the hospital to interview my mother and review the evidence. Mrs. Patterson, I want you to know that we take elder abuse very seriously, Detective Chang told my mother. What happened to you is completely unacceptable. The detective had already reviewed Mr. Johnson's video and interviewed all the witnesses. The case against Karen was solid. We have multiple witnesses, video evidence, and documented injuries, Detective Chang explained. Ms. Mitchell will be charged with assault and battery on an elderly person, which carries enhanced penalties. But as the investigation continued, Detective Chang discovered that this wasn't Karen's first incident of violence. We found 3 other complaints against Ms. Mitchell for harassment and aggressive behavior, she told me. She's been escalating for months, the detective showed me reports from other residents. Karen had threatened to physically remove an elderly man's lawn decorations. She had shoved a teenage boy who was skateboarding in the neighborhood. She had screamed at a pregnant woman until the woman had a panic attack. Your mother's case might be what we need to stop her permanently, Detective Chang said. While my mother recovered at home, Karen was having a complete meltdown in jail. According to Officer Torres, she spent her first night screaming about her rights and demanding to call her lawyer. She kept insisting that she had legal authority to assault people who violated HOA rules, Officer Torres told me. I've never seen anyone so delusional about their own power. Karen's lawyer, David Hoffman, tried to get her released on bail, but the judge had reviewed the video evidence and wasn't sympathetic. Ms. Mitchell, you attacked a 72-year-old woman in broad daylight in front of multiple witnesses, Judge Patricia Martinez said during the bail hearing. This shows a complete disregard for the law and the safety of community members. Karen interrupted the judge. Your Honor, I was enforcing legitimate HOA regulations. That woman was destroying property values. Ms. Mitchell, there is no HOA regulation that allows you to physically assault elderly residents, the judge replied coldly. But she was being defiant. She wouldn't follow my orders. Judge Martinez looked disgusted. Your orders? Ma'am, you are not a police officer or government official. You're a neighborhood volunteer who just committed a serious crime. Bail was set at $50,000, which Karen's family had to scramble to pay. News of Karen's arrest spread quickly through Willowbrook Heights. The neighborhood WhatsApp group, which Karen had used to send threatening messages, was now filled with residents celebrating her downfall. Finally, that woman has been terrorizing us for months, wrote Mrs. Rodriguez. She made my 8-year-old daughter cry by screaming at her for riding her bike, posted the Chen family. She threatened to have my service dog removed because it was disrupting the community aesthetic, shared Mr. Williams, a disabled veteran. The stories kept coming. Karen had been systematically bullying residents for over a year, using her HOA position to justify increasingly aggressive behavior. Mrs. Adams, an 85-year-old widow, shared the most heartbreaking story. She told me my late husband's memorial garden was an eyesore and threatened to have it removed while I was standing right there. Reading these messages, I realized that my mother's attack was just the latest in a long pattern of abuse. Karen had been terrorizing vulnerable people for months, thinking her HOA title protected her. But attacking my mother in front of witnesses had finally exposed her true nature to everyone. Karen's trial was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Her lawyer tried every possible defense, but the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Maria Gonzalez, presented a clear case. Video evidence of the unprovoked attack, testimony from 5 witnesses, medical documentation of my mother's injuries, evidence of Karen's pattern of harassment and threats. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Gonzalez said in her opening statement, the defendant committed a vicious, unprovoked attack on a vulnerable elderly woman. She pushed down a 72-year-old woman, kicked her while she was on the ground, and then destroyed property that held deep sentimental value. Karen's defense lawyer tried to argue that she was overzealous in her community duties and that the attack was a misunderstanding that got out of hand, but when Mr. Johnson's video was played in court, showing Karen clearly pushing my mother down and kicking her, the jury gasped. There was no way to explain away such obvious cruelty. The hardest part of the trial was watching my mother testify. She looked so small and fragile in the witness chair, but her voice was strong and clear. The roses were planted in memory of my husband of 45 years, Mom told the jury. I've been tending that garden for 2 years since he passed. It's one of the few things that brings me comfort. What did the defendant say to you that morning? The prosecutor asked. She told me the flowers were ugly and were destroying property values. When I said they were a memorial for my husband, she said she didn't care how old I was, the rules were the rules. What happened next? She grabbed my arm and tried to pull me away from the garden. When I didn't move fast enough, she pushed me down on the concrete. Mom's voice broke slightly. Then she kicked me while I was on the ground and started destroying my roses. She threw the flowers at me and said this was what happened when people disobeyed the HOA. Several jury members were wiping away tears. Even the judge looked moved by my mother's testimony. When Karen's lawyer cross-examined my mother, He tried to suggest that she had been defiant and uncooperative. "Ma'am, isn't it true that you refuse to follow HOA regulations?" he asked. My mother looked at him with the dignity that only comes from 72 years of life experience. "Young man, I was kneeling in my own garden, tending to flowers I planted in memory of my deceased husband. If that's defiant, then I'm proud to be defiant." The courtroom erupted in applause, and the judge had to call for order. Against her lawyer's advice, Karen insisted on testifying in her own defense. "It was a disaster. I was trying to maintain community standards," Karen said on the stand. "Property values depend on everyone following the rules." "Ms. Mitchell, did you push Mrs. Patterson to the ground?" the prosecutor asked. "She was being uncooperative. I needed to get her attention. By pushing a 72-year-old woman onto concrete, she needed to understand that I was serious about the violations. And kicking her while she was down? I was frustrated. She wasn't listening to me. So you decided to assault an elderly woman?" "I wasn't assaulting anyone. I was enforcing community regulations." Karen's complete lack of remorse shocked everyone in the courtroom. She still believed she had done nothing wrong. "Ms. Mitchell, do you feel any regret for your actions?" the prosecutor asked. "I regret that people are making such a big deal out of this. I was doing my job as HOA president." The jury looked at Karen with obvious disgust. Her testimony had sealed her fate. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. They found Karen guilty on all charges: assault and battery on an elderly person, destruction of property, harassment. Elder abuse. Judge Martinez sentenced Karen to 18 months in jail, 3 years of probation, and community service at a senior center. "Ms. Mitchell, your attack on Mrs. Patterson was cowardly and cruel," the judge said during sentencing. "You targeted a vulnerable elderly woman and showed no remorse for your actions. This court hopes that your sentence will teach you the value of treating others with basic human dignity." Karen was also ordered to pay for my mother's medical expenses and to replace all the destroyed roses. Additionally, the Homeowners Association voted unanimously to remove Karen from her position and ban her from ever serving in HOA leadership again. Karen served 15 months in jail and was released on probation. The experience had changed her, but not necessarily for the better. She moved out of Willowbrook Heights shortly after her release, unable to face the neighbors she had terrorized. My mother, on the other hand, became something of a neighborhood hero. The story of her standing up to Karen inspired other residents to share their own stories of bullying and abuse. The HOA elected Mrs. Rodriguez as the new president. Her first act was to establish new rules protecting residents from harassment and creating a fair process for handling complaints. "We're going to run this neighborhood with kindness and respect," Mrs. Rodriguez announced at her first board meeting. "No one should ever fear their neighbors or their HOA." The most beautiful part of the story's ending involved my mother's garden. After the trial, the entire neighborhood came together to help replant and expand her memorial roses. Mr. Johnson, who had recorded Karen's attack, donated a beautiful rose bush. The Chen family contributed gardening tools and mulch. Mrs. Adams shared cuttings from her own memorial garden. "This garden represents more than just flowers," Mrs. Rodriguez said during the neighborhood planting day. "It represents our community coming together to support each other instead of tearing each other down." My mother was overwhelmed by the support. "I never imagined that something so terrible could lead to something so beautiful," she told the gathered neighbors. The new garden was twice the size of the original, with roses in every color and a small plaque reading, "In memory of Harold Patterson and in honor of all who tend gardens of love." Looking back on that terrible Saturday morning, I'm amazed at how quickly everything changed. In just 3 minutes, Karen went from being a powerful HOA president to a criminal in handcuffs. Her attack on my mother exposed her true nature to the entire community and led to justice for all the people she had bullied over the years. My mother learned that she was stronger than she thought and that her community would stand up for her when she needed help. The neighborhood learned that bullies only have power when good people stay silent, and that sometimes one person's courage to stand up can inspire everyone else to do the same. As for Karen, I hope she learned that power without compassion is just another form of cruelty, and that treating people badly will eventually destroy the person doing the harm. 3 years later, my mother's garden is the most beautiful spot in the neighborhood. She tends it every morning, and neighbors often stop by to chat and admire the roses. Mom has fully recovered from her physical injuries, though she still has nightmares sometimes about that morning, but she says the love and support from our community has healed the emotional wounds. That terrible woman tried to destroy something beautiful, Mom told me recently as we worked in the garden together. Instead, she helped create something even more beautiful, a neighborhood that truly cares about each other. Karen Mitchell beat my elderly mother in front of everyone, thinking her HOA position gave her the right to assault vulnerable people. 3 minutes later, she was arrested. Sometimes justice is swift, and sometimes bullies get exactly what they deserve. In Karen's case, 3 minutes was all it took for her entire world to collapse because of her own cruelty and arrogance. My mother's roses bloom every spring now, more beautiful than ever, tended by hands that refuse to be broken by hatred and surrounded by a community that learned to choose love over fear.